Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Usually, when we think about ancient religious texts, we have this very specific expectation. Right?
Yeah. Like a very serene, quiet, spiritual classroom kind of vibe.
Exactly. A quiet place where you read a gentle proverb, you learn a nice lesson, and the teacher just points to the moral.
Right. It's supposed to be contemplative, like a retreat from the noise of the real world.
But then you open the book of Joshua, and that quiet classroom is just completely obliterated.
Yeah, it really is. It's jarring.
It is. You step into a landscape that, honestly, it reads like a premium HBO script.
Huh.
I mean, if you look at the surface of this book, it is an adrenaline-fueled cinematic blockbuster.
Oh, absolutely. The visuals are just wild.
You have like spies hiding on rooftops under piles of flax while king's guards are kicking in the doors down below.
Right.
And you have the impenetrable towering walls of Jericho literally tumbling down after this massive coordinated sonic event.
Which is such an iconic image.
It is. And then there's a tactical military ambush at a city called Ai with, 30,000 men waiting in a valley for a spear signal. 5 kings get trapped hiding inside a cave. And, at one point, the sun literally stands still in the sky over Gibeon just to allow a battle to finish.
Yeah, the visual spectacle is so gripping. But what's fascinating here is that the action acts as a kind of camouflage.
Camouflage. How so?
Well, when a text is that loud, and that action-packed, it is incredibly easy to get swept up in all the big set pieces and completely miss the actual machinery operating underneath.
Right, you just see the explosions.
Exactly. If you only look at the tumbling walls and the tactical ambushes, you miss the true story, which is really about the profound, often agonizing internal complexities of leading a completely terrified and traumatized people. Yeah. It's a story about overcoming crippling self-doubt and, frankly, the really messy, highly volatile reality of settling a contested land.
And we are pulling from some really incredible groundwork today to help you, the listener, get underneath that surface. We're leaning on a massive 20-week study out of Bushey United Synagogue in England. All of this is being filtered through the philosophy of the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks.
An absolute giant in this field.
He was a former chief rabbi and just a master at taking a wide-angle psychological view of biblical history. Sacks viewed this entire text entirely through the lens of adaptive leadership.
Right, which completely changes how you read it.
It really does. Because when you apply that lens, the psychological stakes of this epic conquest, they become obvious right from the opening lines. The campaign doesn't begin with a tactical military briefing. It begins with God telling Joshua to, quote, be strong and courageous.
And not just once.
Right. 3 times.
Yeah.
In a single chapter, God tells Joshua to be strong and courageous over and over. Now, think about it. If you are stepping into a massive new role and your mentor pulls you aside and says, be brave. Seriously, be brave. No, really, I need you to be incredibly brave.
You'd be terrified.
That is deeply concerning.
Yeah.
It implies you are walking into an absolute meat grinder.
Yeah, Rabbi Sacks observes that this repetition isn't just, rhetorical emphasis. It's not just a pep talk.
So what is it?
Well, God is actually demanding 2 fundamentally different mechanisms of courage from Joshua. So the first is military or practical courage.
Okay.
That's the physical bravery required to step into the Jordan River, look at these giant fortified cities, and literally face an armed adversary.
Right. And the parameters of that kind of courage, they're terrifying, but they are incredibly clear. It's like facing the ultimate boss battle in a video game.
That's a great way to put it.
You face the enemy, and it's a binary outcome. You win or you lose. It's simple.
Right. But the second demand for courage is entirely different. God tells him to be strong, to faithfully uphold the teachings, the Torah.
So it's an internal thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is spiritual or moral courage. That is the courage required not to fight the armies outside the camp, but to fight the internal demons of your own people and yourself.
Wow.
It's the fortitude to hold a fragile community to its highest ethical values when, honestly, every external pressure is pushing you to abandon them for convenience.
That makes me think of the difference between a trauma surgeon and a hospital administrator.
Oh, I like that. Tell me more.
Well, military courage is like being the trauma surgeon in the emergency room. The stakes are literal life and death, the adrenaline is through the roof, but the objective is totally singular, save the patient, and everyone respects you for it.
Right, you're the hero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But spiritual courage, that's the hospital administrator trying to maintain ethical billing practices against a board of directors who, want to cut corners.
Oh, man.
Yeah, there is no adrenaline there. There is no applause. It is just the slow, grinding, daily maintenance of integrity when absolutely no one is watching. And Sacks argues that the second kind is actually exponentially harder to sustain.
And the historical reality totally bears that out. I mean,
Right.
The ultimate test for Joshua was never going to be winning the spectacular wars.
Because wars eventually end.
Right, wars end. The true test was surviving the tedious, really unglamorous decades of community building that followed the violence.
Yeah.
Because anyone with enough charisma can rally a terrified crowd to fight an enemy. That's easy. But very few leaders can prevent that same society from turning on itself and unraveling during peacetime.
And Joshua's need for that immense internal fortitude. It makes perfect sense when you look at his resume, or rather, the resume of the guy he was replacing. I mean, Joshua had arguably the worst middle management transition in human history.
It's the ultimate tough act to follow.
He is stepping into the shoes of Moses.
A man who, let's remember, literally split a sea and spoke directly to the divine face to face.
You cannot follow that act. The expectations are astronomical. But okay, let's unpack this, because there is a very subtle textual shift in how this transition of power happens, and I actually want to push back on Joshua's approach here.
Okay, let's hear it.
So before Moses dies, he tells Joshua to, quote, go with this people. It's collaborative, right? He's walking alongside them.
Yes, very democratic.
But then when God speaks to Joshua, the phrasing shifts entirely. God says, you will bring them into the land. Now, I have to say, bring sounds dangerously close to authoritarianism.
It does. It really does.
Moses walked with the Israelites. He seemed to respect their agency, their free will. Joshua bringing them sounds like a mandate to drag them by the collar and rob them of their choices.
That is a very fair critique. And it sounds authoritarian because, well, in a structural sense, it is.
Wait, really? So God is telling him to be a dictator?
Well, Rabbi Sacks explains this shift using Ronald Heifetz's framework of adaptive leadership.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah, the core mechanism of Heifetz's theory is that a leader must fundamentally alter their entire style to match the specific psychological maturity and the immediate crisis of their people. No two generations face the same challenge.
Okay, so Moses and Joshua were facing different challenges.
Completely different. Moses was a liberator. He solved the technical problem of getting the people out of Egypt. And as a visionary, he prioritized ultimate freedom. But you have to look at the historical context of what happened with that freedom.
Right, the spies.
Exactly. 40 years prior to this moment, Moses gave this newly freed people a democratic choice about entering the land. He sent 12 spies to assess the situation.
And 10 of them came back absolutely terrified.
Yes, and the populace panicked, they mutinied, and they completely refused to enter. The result of that democratic choice was a 40-year death march in the desert.
Wow, so Joshua is dealing with the literal fallout of that exact democratic failure.
He is. Joshua is not the leader of liberation, he is the leader of consolidation. And Heifetz points out that when a system is in an existential crisis and the people are structurally incapable of handling the anxiety of freedom, well, walking with them is actually a dereliction of duty.
That's a heavy thought.
It is. At the edge of the Jordan River, Joshua is staring at a traumatized second-generation populace that might bolt at the first sign of conflict. He cannot afford a committee meeting. He has to bring them, even if they are kicking and screaming.
That is fascinating. So that authoritarian approach wasn't just some, leadership quirk. It was a trauma response.
Precisely.
Joshua knew exactly what happened when you gave a terrified populace a democratic choice, which makes his next move so interesting to me. He sends his own spies into the city of Jericho.
But he does it very differently than Moses did.
Right. He doesn't send 12 representing all the tribes. He just sends 2, quietly.
Yeah.
And the narrative we get in chapter 2, it's a masterclass in the mechanics of fear.
Oh, the story of Rahab. It's brilliant.
Yes. So the spies sneak into Jericho, and they are hidden by Rahab, who is a woman of, let's say, dubious social standing. And her house is built quite literally into the city walls.
Right.
So when the king's guards come looking for them, she hides the Israelite spies under stalks of flax on her roof. She lies to the guards to protect them, and then she negotiates this covert deal.
She's incredibly savvy.
She really is. She says she will keep the spies safe now, provided they spare her and her family when the actual invasion happens. And they seal the pact by hanging a scarlet cord from her window.
It's a great espionage sequence, like right out of a movie. But the real psychological payload of the chapter is what Rahab actually tells the spies while they are in hiding.
What does she say?
Well, To understand why her words are so revolutionary, we have to contrast them with that failed spy mission from 40 years earlier. And here, Rabbi Sacks leans on the insights of the Kotzker Rebbe.
Okay, who was he?
He was a 19th century Hasidic master who was notoriously obsessed with brutal psychological honesty.
I love that.
Yeah, he's great. So the Kotzker Rebbe looked at the report of those original 10 spies from Moses' time. They had come back and said, quote, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them."
We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, meaning they felt tiny and weak.
Right. And the Kotzker Rebbe diagnosed that statement as a massive attribution error.
An attribution error? How so?
He pointed out that the spies were perfectly entitled to the first half of that sentence. Feeling small, feeling like a vulnerable grasshopper when you were staring up at giant fortified walls, that is just a natural human reaction to intimidating circumstances.
Sure, anyone would be scared.
Exactly, but they had absolutely no right to the second half of the sentence. They projected their own internal insecurity outward onto the Canaanites, assuming the enemy saw them as weak.
Oh, wow. We see this mechanism constantly today. I mean, it is the exact anatomy of imposter syndrome in a corporate boardroom.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Right. You walk into a high-stakes meeting, and internally, your stomach is just dropping. You feel like a total fraud. That is your own internal grasshopper.
Yeah, we've all been there.
But then the attribution error kicks in. You project that feeling onto the executives sitting across the table. You assume they are actively judging you, analyzing your flaws, and thinking you don't belong there. You were entirely blinded by your own self-doubt, so you completely misread the reality of the room.
Exactly. And what Rahab does is she walks into that boardroom and flips the lights on. She completely shatters the projection for Joshua's spies.
What does she tell them?
She tells them the exact opposite of what they expect. She says that a deep dread has fallen upon the city, that the Canaanites' courage has completely melted in fear of the Israelites.
Wait, really? The Canaanites were terrified of them?
Yes. Those towering, intimidating walls of Jericho, they are not monuments of strength or military superiority. They are monuments of absolute terror.
Because deeply secure people do not feel the need to hide behind massive, impenetrable walls.
Bingo. The mechanism of clear-sightedness is infinitely more valuable than military might. When you strip away your own projections and stop assuming your adversary is invincible, the obstacles in front of you shrink to their actual size. Rahab gives them the gift of reality.
That is so powerful. So, armed with that clear-sightedness, the Israelites cross the river and they conquer the land. But, the geopolitical reality of warfare is that a common enemy is an incredible unifying force, right?
Oh, for sure. Nothing brings people together like someone trying to destroy them.
Exactly. So the moment the external threat of the Canaanites is neutralized, a massive internal threat rushes in to fill the vacuum. And that threat is the profound anxiety of identity and belonging.
Yes. And this brings us to the half-tribe of Manasseh, which perfectly illustrates this shift from an external war to an internal crisis.
Right, so the half-tribe of Manasseh is literally split in two by geography. Half of the tribe decides to settle on the east bank in the Transjordan, while the other half settles on the west bank, in Canaan proper. So the Jordan River cuts right down the middle of their community.
Yeah. It's a tough situation, and this geographical split nearly triggers a civil war in chapter 22.
A civil war. After everything they just survived.
I know, it's crazy. The military campaigns have ended, and the eastern tribes, the ones living on the quote-unquote wrong side of the river, they decide to build a massive, imposing altar.
Okay.
And the western tribes immediately misinterpret this. They assume it is an act of religious rebellion, like a declaration of secession. So they mobilize their armies and actually prepare to slaughter their own brothers just to preserve the union.
But the mechanism of diplomacy intervenes here, thankfully. They actually send a delegation to talk before drawing swords.
Which is always a good idea.
Highly recommended.
Yeah.
But how does a geographical split from 3 millennia ago relate to how we form our identities today? I mean, what do they actually say at that diplomatic meeting?
Well, through that communication, the eastern tribes reveal the crushing psychological weight they've been carrying. The altar has absolutely nothing to do with rebellion. It is a memorial.
A memorial for what?
It is a desperate physical plea to future generations. The eastern tribes explain that they are terrified. They know they live across a physical boundary. They fear that a few generations down the line, the Israelites in Canaan will look across the river and say, "You don't share our land. You don't belong to us."
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It really is. The altar was built as tangible proof that despite living on the margins, they are still fundamentally part of the nation. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Rabbi Sacks viewed the half-tribe of Manasseh as a permanent historical marker that identity is incredibly fragile.
We see this constantly in the modern era, don't we? It's the anxiety of living between worlds.
Exactly.
Whether it's, children of immigrants feeling too culturally Western for their parents, but maybe too ethnic for their peers, or people shifting socioeconomic classes. It is the terrifying vulnerability of looking at your own community and fearing they will tell you that you are on the wrong side of the river and you do not belong.
And that anxiety over exactly where people belong, it transitions the text into what is structurally the most difficult section of the entire book.
Oh, you mean the drawing of the physical borders?
Yes, the borders.
Let's talk about chapters 13 through 21. Because if we are being completely honest with you, the listener, reading these chapters is an absolute slog.
It is tough. I won't lie.
It reads like a municipal surveyor's report from antiquity. It is line after grueling line of, the border went down to the stone of Bohan, son of Reuben, and then to the shoulder north of Ekron. I really have to push back here.
Okay.
Why does a profound text about spiritual courage and adaptive leadership suddenly devote 9 whole chapters to ancient municipal zoning laws? I mean, treating an ancient religious text as a modern real estate deed is exactly what makes this subject so volatile today.
That is a very valid point, and we need to be really clear here. It is impossible to read these chapters today without feeling the heavy, tragic weight of the deeply contested political realities of that specific region right now.
Exactly. It's a very charged topic.
It is, and we need to make it absolutely clear that we are not endorsing any modern political viewpoints here, left-wing or right-wing. Neither side is being endorsed by this analysis. We are strictly maintaining an impartial stance and just reporting on how Rabbi Sacks read this text.
Right. So how did he read it, if not as a political manifesto?
Well, Rabbi Sacks was exceptionally careful not to treat these ancient texts as simple one-to-one modern political manifestos. He acknowledged the tragic realities today. But we must look at why these chapters exist within the historical context of the narrative itself.
Okay, take us back there.
For a people who have just emerged from centuries of slavery, followed by 40 years of total homelessness in a desert, geography is not just dirt and rocks.
It's the literal foundation of their existence.
Exactly. These chapters are legal documents, and legal documents regarding land allocation are never trivial to an indigenous or previously exiled people.
Right, because they've never had it before.
Sacks noted that the painstaking detail documenting every stone, every valley, and every shoulder of a hill proves that the Jewish relationship to this land is a foundational 3,000-year-old anchor of their identity, not just some recent geopolitical invention.
That makes a lot of sense.
When you have been stateless, defining exactly where your safe harbor begins and ends is a literal matter of life and death. The text is dry because the law is the only thing standing between a society and total chaos.
Wow. Which really sets up the ultimate climax of the book perfectly. So the borders are painstakingly drawn, the external wars are over, the land is secure. Joshua has successfully navigated the technical problems of statecraft.
He did his job?
He did. But now he faces his greatest adaptive challenge yet. How do you keep a society united when you can no longer unite them against a common enemy?
And he addresses this in chapter 24 at Shechem.
Right. So let's set the scene. Joshua is incredibly old at this point. He knows his death is imminent. He gathers the entire nation at Shechem for his grand farewell address.
A huge moment.
Huge. And considering his history, considering he is a military commander who previously had to use an authoritarian, bring them approach at the river, what he does next is completely counterintuitive.
It really is surprising.
He doesn't threaten them. He doesn't leverage his military authority to enforce religious compliance. Instead, he drops one of the most staggering lines in religious literature. He looks at this settled, secure nation and says, "Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve."
Choose for yourselves. It is a radical departure from the power dynamics of the ancient world.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if you look at the original covenant established at Mount Sinai 40 years earlier, it was essentially a theological shotgun wedding, wasn't it?
A shotgun wedding. I love that.
Well, think about it. God had just systematically dismantled the Egyptian empire with 10 plagues. He split the Red Sea. He was manifesting as thunder and fire on top of a mountain.
True. That's a lot of pressure.
Right. The Israelites were traumatized refugees. They didn't exactly have the cognitive freedom to look at that display of cosmic power and say, no thanks, we'd like to opt out.
Yeah, the power dynamic was entirely asymmetrical, and Sacks points out that you cannot freely consent when you're overwhelmed by awe and terror.
But the environment in Shechem is fundamentally different. The awe and terror are gone. The miracles have largely stopped. They are safe, they have homes, and they are free.
Yes.
So by telling them to choose for yourselves, Joshua is making them renew their societal vows because they actually want to participate, not because they are trapped by circumstance.
And Rabbi Sacks termed this concept covenantal politics.
Covenantal politics.
Yes. It is a revolutionary idea. In the ancient Near East, kings ruled through coercion, military force, and the hoarding of resources. You obeyed the sovereign because he had a sword to your neck. But a society built on that kind of external pressure isn't a community. It is a hostage situation. Sacks believed that genuine religious and societal commitment operates on the exact same mechanism as genuine love. It must be freely given to hold any actual meaning.
Because you cannot inherit a choice. A father's decision at Sinai doesn't bind a son at Shechem unless the son actively chooses it for himself.
Exactly. Joshua recognizes that his authoritarian approach at the Jordan River was a temporary necessity for a traumatized people. But a mature, settled society can only survive on free consent. They have to choose their values every single day without a military commander forcing their hand.
When you step back and look at the trajectory of this text we've covered today, it is just astonishing. I mean, we started by looking at the HBO spectacle of falling walls and ambushes.
Loud stuff.
Right. But the mechanisms driving the story are deeply internal. It's about the grinding reality of moral courage over military flash. It's about recognizing the attribution error of imposter syndrome, just like Rahab taught the spies.
Yeah.
It's navigating the paralyzing fear of marginalization with the half-tribe of Manasseh. And finally, it's evolving into a society that chooses its own ethical constraints through free consent at Shechem.
It's an incredible journey, and yet the narrative leaves us with a deeply unsettling reality for the listener to mull over.
Oh, what's that?
Well, the book of Joshua concludes with a rapid succession of 3 deaths. Joshua dies, the high priest Eleazar dies, and the bones of Joseph, which had been carried all the way from Egypt, are finally buried in the earth.
Wow.
Yeah, the era of the founding legends is definitively closed. And the very next book in the biblical canon, the book of Judges, opens with a terrified, scrambling question from the people. They ask, now that Joshua is gone, who shall lead us?
And the text never provides a singular, neat answer to that question, does it?
No, because there isn't one. Rabbi Sacks' ultimate takeaway from this massive epic is that the era of relying on a charismatic savior coming over the horizon to solve our problems is over.
The miracles have stopped.
Exactly. The sea isn't going to split and the walls aren't going to fall from a shout. The responsibility to answer the question, who shall lead us, falls entirely onto you, the listener. It falls onto you to exercise that quiet, grinding moral courage in your own community every single day.
So the next time you find yourself facing an intimidating room or a fractured community, remember that the real conflict is rarely the walls in front of you. The real conflict is the one happening quietly inside. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.